Don't trust anyone. 4 words, whispered on a monitored facility call by a wife who was herself already facing serious legal issues. And the man she was warning, her husband, sitting in a holding room, having already done the one thing no defense attorney in America would ever tell their client to do. He told the truth. Before the lawyers, before the trial, before anyone even had time to build a case against him. Joseph Duggar looked a man in the eye and admitted everything. And that admission may be the most legally catastrophic moment in a family already defined by catastrophic moments. If this story has your attention right now, and I promise you it should, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Because what we're about to go through is not just a true mystery. It's a psychological thriller hiding inside one of the most recognizable family brands in American television history. And it is only getting started. Let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what's happening right now in 2026, you have to understand what was being sold to the world for over a decade before any of this came to light. The Duggar family was not just a television show. They were a movement. 19 children, a father and mother who built an entire public identity around faith, purity, and the idea that living differently, radically, visibly, unapologetically differently, was something to be celebrated. TLC handed them a platform, and they used it masterfully. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar were not accidental stars. They understood the camera, they understood branding, and what they built was something almost impossible to criticize on the surface, because the surface was immaculate. The courtships, the no kissing before marriage rule, the carefully choreographed family moments, the matching outfits, the smiles, the scripture. Image was designed to communicate one thing. This family has figured something out that the rest of the world has not. And for years, millions of people believed it. Joseph Duggar was part of that image. He courted Kendra Caldwell in what can only be described as a very Duggar way. The engagement happened at a family wedding, publicly, in front of everyone they knew. It was the kind of moment that gets clipped and shared and commented on, and it fit perfectly into the narrative the family had been building for years. 2 young people, raised in faith, choosing each other in the most public and wholesome way imaginable. They stepped back from social media after 2021. The family, already under enormous pressure, following Josh Duggar's legal troubles and sentencing, began a kind of strategic withdrawal, less visibility, less engagement, quiet. But quiet, it turns out, is not the same as safe. In the summer of 2020, the Duggar family went on vacation to Panama City Beach, Florida. County. A family trip. The kind of thing that gets described later in court documents in language that is clinical and devastating in equal measure. A girl who was 9 years old at the time was present during that trip. She did not come forward immediately. She did not tell anyone right away. She carried what happened with her for 6 years. In 2026, at the age of 14, she told investigators what occurred during that vacation. What she described, according to the Bay County Sheriff's affidavit, involved multiple incidents with Joseph Duggar. The formal allegation that followed, severe misconduct involving a very young individual, reflects what investigators concluded after reviewing her account. Now, a lot of people hear 6 years later and immediately start asking questions. Why did she wait? What took so long? And these are not unfair questions, but they reflect a misunderstanding of how disclosure actually works for younger affected individuals. Researchers and child psychologists have documented for decades that delayed disclosure is not the exception. It is the norm. Children who experience mistreatment by someone they know, someone embedded in a family or community context, often do not have the emotional or psychological framework to process what happened, let alone the language to describe it or the trust in a system that might actually believe them. At 9 years old, she was a child. At 14, something shifted, and when it did, she spoke. That decision, made by a teenager, is what broke this entire case open. On March 17, 2026, the affected individual's father confronted Joseph Duggar directly. Think about what that moment must have looked like. A father, knowing what his daughter had finally been able to tell him, standing in front of the man she had named, and instead of denial, instead of the deflection, the lawyering up, the immediate wall of silence that almost every person in Joseph's position would have erected, Joseph Duggar admitted it to the father, and then remarkably to investigators from Tontitown, Arkansas. He shared his account, voluntarily, before anyone compelled him to say a single word. From a legal standpoint, it is difficult to overstate how significant this is. Voluntary admissions made to authorities, not while detained, not during a custodial interview, not in a context where Miranda warnings would have been required, are among the most powerful pieces of evidence the state can present. There is no coercion argument. There is no fruit of the poisonous tree motion to file. There is no "my client was confused or pressured." He walked into that conversation and told the truth. Defense attorneys across the country will tell you the same thing. The first rule, before anything else, is do not talk to investigators without counsel present. It is not because those at fault deserve protection. It is because the adversarial legal system is built on the premise that the state must prove its case, and voluntary admissions short-circuit that process entirely. Joseph Duggar did not follow that rule, and now the state has his own words to work with. On March 18, 2026, one day after that admission, Joseph Duggar was taken into custody in Tontitown, Arkansas. The official mandate came out of Bay County, Florida, where the alleged incidents occurred 6 years earlier. He was cited for severe misconduct involving a very young individual. The bond was set at $600,000. He filed a formal denial of the claims. He demanded a jury trial. And for anyone who has been following the Duggar family for any length of time, the timeline of this detainment carries an almost unbearable echo. Because 5 years earlier, in April of 2021, another Duggar brother sat in a holding facility following his own detainment on federal issues related to severe digital misconduct involving minors. Josh Duggar was found liable in December of 2021 and sentenced to over 12 years in a federal facility. 2 brothers, 2 public downfalls, 5 years apart, the same family, the same public image, the same cameras that captured the courtships and the proposals and the Bible studies. The parallels are not coincidental in the sense that they reveal something, not about genetics or inevitability, but about systems, about what happens when accountability is internal and invisible, about what happens when a family's first instinct, when something goes wrong, is to manage the narrative rather than involve the authorities. 2 days after Joseph's detainment, investigators searched the family home in Tontitown, Arkansas. What they found there added an entirely new dimension to an already complicated case. Locks on the outside of the children's bedroom doors. Not locks designed to keep people out of the rooms. Locks positioned to keep people inside them. And if you followed the Josh Duggar story in 2015, when earlier claims against him first became public, you may remember that a similar detail emerged in that case as well. The family had at that time used a comparable method as a way of keeping Josh physically separated from younger siblings at night. The reappearance of this detail in 2026 stopped investigators and observers alike, because it raises a question that does not have a comfortable answer. When a family responds to one child's concerning behavior by locking other children's doors from the outside, and then, years later, investigators find the same configuration in another household, what exactly does that tell us about what was known and when it was known and by whom? On March 20th, 2026, Kendra Duggar was taken into custody. She faced 4 counts of compromising the well-being of a minor and 4 counts of unlawful restraint. Locks on the doors are not an abstract detail in this case. They are the legal issues. While Joseph was in holding, he sent emails from the facility. This is not unusual. People in custody communicate with their families, and those communications are monitored and can be legally requested. What he wrote to Kendra was ordinary in tone. Love you to the moon and back. The kind of phrase that appears in birthday cards and bedtime routines and family group chats. Kendra's response was less ordinary. She replied, "Hang in there," and then she sent him the lyrics to a song called "The Truth." Now, there are a few ways to interpret this. You could read it as emotional support, a wife reaching toward her husband through the only channels available to her, choosing music the way people choose music when words feel inadequate. That is a reasonable reading. You could also read it differently, a song titled "The Truth," sent by a woman facing serious legal claims to a man who has already admitted his involvement on a monitored channel where everything said is recorded and potentially used as evidence. That is a choice. Whether it was a message, a reminder, a form of defiance, or something else entirely, is not something anyone outside that relationship can say with certainty. But it is the kind of detail that sits in your mind, that you keep turning over. What is the truth? Whose truth? And what did she mean by it? This is part 1, and we are just getting to the part of this story that I think is the most revealing. Kendra's monitored facility call, the wording she issued, the name she mentioned, and what all of it suggests about what may have been happening behind the scenes long before March 2026. That is coming in part 2. If you are still here, and clearly you are, then you already know this story is not what it appears to be on the surface. It never is with this family. Drop your theory about the song in the comments right now. I want to know what you think the truth meant. And make sure you are subscribed, because part 2 goes somewhere that will genuinely change how you see this entire situation. The second part is starting now. When someone is in a holding facility awaiting trial, they are told something very clearly and very early. Every call you make from this building is being recorded. There are no exceptions. There is no privacy. The moment you dial, you are on the record. Authorities can access those recordings. State attorneys can formally request them. They can be played in a courtroom in front of a jury. Most people, when they understand this, adjust what they say. They speak carefully. They keep things surface level. They say, "I love you, and we'll get through this, and my lawyer says not to talk about the case." Kendra Duggar was on a monitored facility call with Joseph Duggar, and what she said was this: "If there's anything I've learned from this, do not trust anyone." 4 words into this story, and we are already in a completely different psychological landscape than a typical legal proceeding. Because this is not a wife saying, "Stay strong," or "Pray about it," or even, "I believe in you." This is a warning, delivered with the kind of specificity that suggests it came from somewhere real, from experience, from observation, from something she had already watched play out in this family's orbit before. Do not trust anyone. She then told Joseph not to talk to someone named Greg. Who is Greg? That is the question that changes the entire shape of this story. Gregory Payne is an attorney with documented connections to Josh Duggar's legal defense. And the fact that Kendra, from inside a holding center, facing her own legal issues, is managing her husband's legal risks by warning him away from a specific person connected to the previous Duggar legal battle. That is a woman who has clearly been watching, studying, and learning from what happened to Josh, from how that case was handled, from where it went wrong, from who is involved and what role each person played. She is not panicking on that phone call. She is strategizing. She is thinking multiple moves ahead, even from inside a holding area. And that tells you something about Kendra Duggar that the courtship footage and the family blog posts never would. This is not someone who is simply along for the ride in her husband's life. This is someone who is engaged, aware, and operating with a level of situational intelligence that the sheltered, homeschooled, quiverful daughter-in-law image does not account for. Whether that intelligence is being used in service of justice or in opposition to it is at this point a matter for the courts. But the idea that Kendra is a passive figure in this story, that phone call ends that narrative. Let's talk about what she is actually facing. Kendra Duggar was taken into custody on March 20th, 2026. 4 counts of compromising the well-being of a minor. 4 counts of unlawful restraint. 8 legal claims. The unlawful restraint counts are directly connected to the locks found on the outside of the children's bedroom doors. In Arkansas, unlawful restraint does not require that someone be locked in a room for days or weeks. It requires that a person was inappropriately restricted in a way that interfered with their liberty. A lock on the outside of a child's door, controlled by an adult, qualifies. But here is where the well-being charges become significant on a different level. Compromising a young person's well-being is not simply about physical injury. It encompasses situations where a child is placed in circumstances that a reasonable person would recognize as deeply concerning or damaging to their welfare, which means state attorneys may be arguing that Kendra was aware, or should have been aware, of a risk to those children and failed to protect them. That is a different kind of accusation. That moves this beyond the locks on the doors. That opens a door into the question of what Kendra knew and when she knew it. Her attorney is Travis Story. If that name sounds familiar, it should. Travis Story was part of Josh Duggar's defense team. Now, attorneys take multiple clients. That is not itself unusual or sinister. But in the context of this specific family, with this specific web of interconnected legal risks, the choice of a defense attorney is not just a logistical decision. It is a strategic one. It signals something about how the defense intends to approach the case, about what kind of legal architecture they are building. Travis Story knows the Duggar family's legal landscape. He has been inside one of the most high-profile legal matters connected to this family. He understands how these cases move. The pressure points are what arguments have been tried before and how they landed. Kendra hiring Travis Story is not an accident. It is an informed decision made by someone who has done their homework. And paired with that facility call, the warning about Greg, the strategic awareness, the lyrics to the truth, a picture starts to emerge of a defense that is going to be carefully constructed, deeply informed by the Josh Duggar experience, and anything but straightforward. Let's look at where these cases stand right now, heading into the spring of 2026. Joseph Duggar has an April 20 date in Florida, Bay County. This is the jurisdiction where the alleged incidents occurred during that 2020 vacation. Florida's approach to matters involving minors is notably aggressive. The state has some of the strictest penalty guidelines in the country for these categories of issues, and Bay County officials are not known for offering generous legal settlements in cases with strong evidentiary records. The fact that Joseph has already filed a denial of the claims and demanded a jury trial is interesting for a few reasons. On one hand, it is standard practice. Almost everyone formally denies everything initially, regardless of the eventual outcome. It preserves options. It buys time. It allows the defense to examine the full scope of the evidence before making any decisions. On the other hand, given that Joseph already made voluntary admissions to the affected individual's father and to authorities, a jury trial puts those admissions in front of 12 people who will be asked to weigh them. A defense attorney can try to contextualize an admission, can try to argue about the conditions under which it was made, can introduce doubt around elements of the case. But the admission itself is not going away. It exists, it was made, and in a jury trial, it will be presented. Then there is the April 29 Arkansas hearing. Both Joseph and Kendra face proceedings in Tontitown. Arkansas handles the domestic issues, the unlawful restraint, the well-being counts against Kendra, and the Arkansas elements of Joseph's case. 2 states, 2 court systems, 2 sets of legal representatives for the state. The legal complexity alone is staggering, and it is all moving simultaneously. Here is what I keep coming back to when I look at this entire case. In 2015, when the original Josh Duggar allegations became public, the ones involving his own sisters, the ones that had been handled internally by the family for years before authorities ever became involved, there was a moment where the public had to reckon with something uncomfortable. The Duggars had been given a platform, had been celebrated, had been held up as an example of a particular kind of family life. And that platform had coexisted for years with something deeply wrong happening inside the same walls. The public response in 2015 was anger, yes, but also something like shock. This was supposed to be a good family, the safe family, the family that had the answers. We are now in 2026. Josh Duggar is serving a 12-year federal sentence. Joseph Duggar is in holding, facing severe claims from a 2020 vacation where a 9-year-old girl was allegedly deeply affected. Kendra Duggar is out on bond, facing 8 formal counts, and the locks on the outside of the children's bedroom doors, a detail that first appeared in connection with Josh, have reappeared in another household, in another generation, in another case. The shock this time around feels different. It feels less like surprise and more like grief, because the question being asked now is not, how did this happen, in the sense of confusion. The question is being asked in the sense of exhaustion, of recognition, of a pattern that has now repeated itself in a way that is impossible to dismiss as coincidence or exception. But here's where I want to land this story, because it would be easy and wrong to end here in the weight of all of that. A 14-year-old girl came forward, 6 years after a vacation she was taken on as a child. 6 years of carrying something that was not her fault, that she did not choose, that happened to her while she was 9 years old. She found her voice. She told what she knew. She did the hardest thing a person in her position can do, which is trust that the system she was stepping into would take her seriously. And the system responded. Investigators interviewed Joseph. He admitted everything. An official mandate was issued. He was taken into custody. Paperwork was filed. Court dates are set. That is not nothing. That is the system working the way it is supposed to work. Imperfectly, slowly, belatedly in many ways, but moving. And it moved because a 14-year-old girl decided to speak. There is a version of this story where she never says anything, where she carries it into adulthood, where it shapes her in ways no one around her fully understands, where Joseph Duggar goes on living his life with a secret that stays secret. That version of this story exists for far too many affected individuals. It is the more common version. This is not that version, and the reason it is not is because of her. Joseph Duggar's April 20th date in Florida is approaching fast. The April 29th Arkansas hearing will follow shortly after. Kendra's legal team is building a defense. Travis Story is in the room. The facility calls have been flagged. The emails have been reviewed. The song lyrics have been noted. And somewhere in Bay County, Florida, a state attorney is sitting with a case file that includes a voluntary admission made by the defendant before he was even detained. That is the foundation they are building on. Everything else, the timeline, the corroborating details, the physical evidence from the search of the home, that all stacks on top of a base that Joseph himself helped construct. His own words. That is what a trial, if it happens, will come back to again and again. Whatever the defense argues about context, about the circumstances of that admission, about Kendra's formal claims, about the legal complexity of a two-state process, the jury will keep returning to the same place. He said it. He said it to the father. He said it to the investigators. He said it before anyone told him he had to. Why does someone do that? I genuinely do not know the answer to that question. It could be remorse so overwhelming it needed an exit. It could be a miscalculation, a belief that honesty would somehow soften what was coming. It could be something about the way he was raised, about a worldview in which coming clean is the first step towards something like redemption, and where the truth itself felt more urgent than the legal consequences that followed. Whatever the reason, the legal consequences are now very much present, and they are not going away. There is one more thing I want to say before we close this out. The Duggar family spent years building an image around the idea that their way of doing things, the faith, the structure, the insularity, the internal accountability, produced something better, safer, purer, and that image was powerful enough that millions of people watched them, followed them, rooted for them. What these two cases, Josh's and now Joseph's, reveal is not that religious families are uniquely dangerous. They are not. What they reveal is what happens when image becomes more important than accountability. When the first response to something wrong is to manage it internally, rather than involve systems designed specifically for these situations. When the priority is protecting the brand, rather than protecting the children. The locks on the doors are not just evidence in a legal proceeding. They are a metaphor for a family that kept things locked away, that handled things quietly, that trusted itself over everything else, and the children paid for that trust. So here is where we are. Joseph Duggar is in holding. He admitted his involvement. He has formally denied the claims and demanded a jury trial. His Florida date is April 20th. His Arkansas hearing is April 29th. His wife is facing 8 formal counts of her own. She has hired Josh Duggar's former defense attorney. She warned him from the facility not to trust anyone, and specifically not to talk to a man connected to the last time this family needed a defense team. The 14-year-old girl who came forward is the reason any of this is happening at all. Justice is not always fast. It is not always clean. It does not always look the way we want it to look, or arrive when we need it to. But when a child finds the courage to speak, even years later, even after all that time, even into a system that does not always listen, sometimes it listens. This time, it listened. Before you go, I want you to do 3 things. First, drop your theory about that song in the comments. Kendra sent Joseph lyrics to a song called The Truth, while both of them were facing legal issues and their communications were being monitored. What do you think she meant by it? Was it supported? A reminder? Something else? I read every comment on this channel, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Second, if you watched both parts of this video and you are not subscribed yet, fix that right now. Hit the subscribe button, because the next video on this channel digs into something that this video only touched the surface of. What Kendra may have known before 2026. Not suspected, known. There are details in this case that have not been widely covered. And when you see them laid out in full, the picture of what was happening inside that household changes significantly. That video is coming, and you do not want to find it 3 weeks late in someone else's recommendations. Third, share this video with someone who followed the original Duggar story back in the TLC days, because this is the chapter they do not know has been written yet. And it is the most important one. The truth, as someone once texted from one facility account to another, has a way of coming out. Sometimes it takes 6 years. Sometimes it takes a 14-year-old girl deciding that she has carried it long enough. Either way, it comes out.